Are you a rich man? I love that pepper. My reason is like forever.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here and joining us for this teaching about the Pretrial Fairness Act and the victory that Illinois just won. And sort of the title of our talk today is Defending Pretrial Freedom in Illinois. So I'm so happy that all of you are here with us. My name is Malik Aleem. I'm the campaign coordinator for the Coalition to End Money Bond. And this is Kevin Blumenberg. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Kevin Blumenberg, representative of the People's Lobby.
Great. And so we just wanted to kind of ground you all in a little bit of background about how we got here, right? It took a ton of work, right? We just passed a landmark piece of legislation, and as a result, we will become the first state in the union to end the practice of money bond. So that's a huge deal, and it took a lot of people power and a lot of work. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about just kind of the impact of this victory?
I think it's amazing. We live in a country where we say that we are presumed to be innocent until proven guilty, and so with the passage of this act, it has made a reality for a lot of us. So I'm excited about it, and I'm hoping that everybody else is, because you no longer have to sit up in jail for no other reason other than the fact that you're poor. Your family members may not be able to afford to pay a bill to get you out. So it was an amazing victory for all of us.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about the people power that it took to make this victory possible. So a lot of times, we talk about organizing and movement building, momentum, mobilization. Um, Here are some numbers for you. I know the People's Lobby had a lot to do with our phone calls and texts. Kevin, you want to talk about those?
Sure. Between December and January, we made about 19 sessions of texting, sessions of phone calls. We also had a Twitter storm with approximately 2,400 manual dials, and just over 300,000 when it came down to like speaking and making connections with people when it came to texting. So those were a lot of great numbers, and we're hoping that as we continue to push forward, that we can have other people assist us in making sure that this act gets implemented.
Indeed, and I've been, like I said, I'm the campaign coordinator for the coalition, and I've been in this role for a year, a little over a year, and in that time, we've had 29 different Pretrial Fairness Act events, right, in different parts of the state. Obviously, a lot of those had to be virtual because a lot of the advocacy work that we did was over this past year during the pandemic, and so just kind of sit with that and understand that this victory, took a lot of work, right? And so I want to talk to some other members of our coalition and our network a little more about exactly what that means, right? What did it mean, and how did we get where we are now? Hey, I got friends, more friends. Great. Thank you all so much for joining me. We have Will Tansman from the People's Lobby, Charlene Grace, Patrice James, as well as Marie Franklin. So thank you all so much for being here. Um, let's just hop right into it. Um, Charlene, Patrice, and Marie, you all have experience working in the criminal justice system in different capacities and in different places. Can you talk about what those capacities were and what you saw in terms of the systemic practices and their resulting impacts on communities that led you to focus on the issue of ending money bond?
Sure, who wants to go first? Patrice or Marie?
Hey, I'll go. So as a kid, I used to see police officers sicking dogs on black people. So I thought, okay, I know what the problem is. They don't have any black police officers. So when I graduated from high school, I attended Bradley University and got a degree in criminal justice. And after that, I applied for the Illinois State Police. Got hired, worked for them for 12 years, and that was the hardest 12 years of my life. I thought to be that bridge between, you know, the Black community and law enforcement, and try to bring our issues of the community to law enforcement and try to do it in a different way. And, you know, it just didn't work. It just didn't work. You know, our people were just being just misused and in the system, you know, disproportionately. And I tried to fight it from that side, and it just didn't work. It just didn't work. So I had to come outside and organize, you know, with UCM and with the network, and in cash money bond, because I knew that was just keeping poor people in jail, you know. And in this country, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, and we had innocent people who hadn't been convicted of anything in jail, just mainly, basically because they were poor.
Yeah, and I will build on that. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Patrice James. I'm at the Schreiber Center. And, you know, I come at this from being a public defender in two very different jurisdictions. And, you know, I think everything that people already know, money bond is coercive. It forces people to sit in jail and to take pleas and really suck resources out of communities and make people make really tough decisions, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding money. And so I think the impact of what Illinois has just done, hopefully with the governor signing it, is life-changing for many. Our good friend, Sharon Mitchell, who we'll hear later, always tells us, paints the picture of seeing people in line waiting to pay bond for their loved ones and looking up and down the line and seeing nothing but Black women in that line who have raised money or have taken money from their bank accounts to pay the court system. And then the court system keeps a piece of that money. So, you know, it's a horrific system. I have had many conversations with families and with accused people and I've told them, you know, it's likely you're not going to get a bond that you can afford. So here's a way you can get out of jail. And the way that you can get out of jail, you can plead guilty. And that no one should have to make those choices.
Yeah, and I came to Money Bail working against money bond and pretrial incarceration through doing legal support for social movements. So in 2014, I was working as a volunteer doing support for young Black people organizing against police violence. And I first really, truly encountered the money bond system when we were trying to support people arrested at a vigil for Deshaun Pittman after he was murdered by Chicago police. And people arrested at the vigil for Deshaun were sent to Central Bond Court, and they were given money bonds that totaled almost $30,000. And that was really the first time that I, as a white person who hadn't personally experienced this or had close proximity to it, encountered that idea that we're going to have to buy someone's freedom while they're awaiting trial, and hearing from other attorneys this is going to take years, and knowing and working with family members to support the people arrested and to get them out, what the consequences were on their lives, right? The separation from their families, their inability to work and earn income and support their families. The youngest person who was arrested wasn't able to finish high school on time because she was arrested and jailed simply because she couldn't come up with a certain amount of money to pay bond. And over the years, we've heard many, many people bravely and generously share the stories of the impact of being jailed while awaiting trial had on their lives. And we consistently hear the same things, that loss of jobs, that loss of housing, the threat to being able to keep your children, keep your family together, and the just really destructive impact that Marie and Patrice, you also named.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And yeah, Charlene, we actually met during that time that you're discussing the earlier days. And so, Will, I know you and Charlene have both been moving this campaign forward from the very start. So can you tell us how the Coalition to End Money Bond was formed in terms of the grassroots organizing that drove the momentum behind the movement?
Yeah, so the coalition was formed out of kind of several different streams in the long tradition of organizing against the racist systems of policing and incarceration over the last few decades. One of those streams was the formation of the Bond Fund, which obviously Charlene could talk about. But another was the organizing that Sol and the People's Lobby did starting in 2013 against Anita Alvarez, then Cook County State's Attorney and kind of a classic old school racist, tough on crime prosecutor. And a lot of movement folks targeted Anita Alvarez because she did a lot of awful things, including covering up the police murder of Laquan McDonald. But Sol and TPL specifically fought her because she was a bad actor on the use of money bail. We had members impacted by that issue, so we organized a massive voter engagement effort to get Kim Foxx elected. And then when Fox was elected, we started talking to legislators we had relationships with about how we could build on that momentum and to create legislation to end money bail. And the People's Lobby was connected with the Bond Fund then and the coalition, and we sort of brought we came together with other coalition partners that really the Bond Fund had initially convened to start working on this broader coalition effort.
Great. Charlene, did you want to chime in, or we can? Cool. Thank you, Will. Marie, so we met in Bloomington Normal, probably the second month of my employment with the coalition, during a strategy retreat that we had for the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice last January. Wow, almost exactly 1 year ago. So as the statewide organizer for the network and as a resident of the Metro East area, what is the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice, and how has it moved the campaign forward since that strategy session where we met?
Right. So the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice was birthed out of the coalition wanting to start a statewide effort where we have organizations from across the state, from Rockford down to East St. Louis. And so the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice was birthed out of that. And so we have organizations all over the state that are working together to end pretrial incarceration. And we work together using our local efforts and then combining them together to move the Pretrial Justice Act over the finish line and get it passed. And so we did that by just, combining our efforts, going from one end of the state to the other. We have at least 30 organizations now that belong to the network, and we are still recruiting and asking, for networks, organizations who are like-minded and are down for this cause that we are transforming criminal justice here in the state of Illinois. So if you're looking out there and this is something that's in your gut, email me, marief@ucmetroeast.org, because we are still taking on members, because this is just the beginning of this fight. So, but we like I said, we're 30 strong now statewide. This is not just a Cook County thing. This goes across all the borders of the state of Illinois through all 102 counties.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I can't stress enough how important the network has been, because I'm an Illinois boy, so I was raised kind of all over the state. Spent time in Carbondale, Edwardsville, and Springfield, and the Cook County area, and just to watch and see and be involved with that effort, right, to make sure that we are moving as a state, because our state is diverse. We have a metro area, but we also have rural areas. So it was really important for that work to happen. So thank you for touching on that, Marie. And then just for anyone who wants to chime in and give your kind of take on this next question, you each represent different types of organizations. We have faith-based groups, policy organizations, grassroots organizations, and everyone has kind of different theories of change, different ideology, operational style, etc. So can you talk about how that range of kind of diversity of thought and approach within the coalition and network has impacted particularly the legislation as it was written, and then the work that it took to get it passed in the community and with the legislators.
I think I can start out and be really brief since everyone should contribute to this question. Something I heard someone else say probably 4 years ago at this point that I return to a lot is this idea that lawyers advise based on what's possible and organizers change what's possible. And the criminal justice policy space is dominated by lawyers for the worse. We have our functions. It's helpful to know people who are a little comfortable rearranging the words in the statutes and writing new ones. But in terms of the big picture vision and the boldness of that vision, that was really driven by the grassroots community organizing and the communities who identified what wanted to happen, right? So if we had been a policy-heavy coalition that when we started talking in 2015, when we formed in 2016, if we had been like, our goal is to pass a bill right away and to notch this off and to say that we did it, like we would not have been able to pass the transformative bill that was passed this year after 5 years of organizing. And the other thing I'll say too that this coalition has been so good at, and that I think will come up as other people are talking, is really pulling on so many different levels. Like Will talked about the electoral work and working on elections, making this an issue in primaries, making it an issue in general elections. And then also one thing the coalition did early on was work with civil rights attorneys to file a case in Cook County and to explore filing cases in other counties. So there was that leverage of the fact that the current system had to go because it's been unconstitutional, and courts around the country were coming to that conclusion. And the question was who would shape what replaced an affordable money bond. And I'll turn it over to others.
Well, I can just speak to UCM, United Congregations of Metro East, who I organize for, along with the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. We are a faith-based organization, and we just came to that work, bringing our faith with us, knowing that, the Lord calls for the beloved community where everybody thrives. And this criminal justice system was certainly, in opposition to that. And so as a faith-based group, we brought our power and we brought our prayers in order to move this thing forward, because we know that the current system is totally opposite of the beloved community that we pray for and that we want to see, in our lifetime every day. So, we came ready, and we came with Jesus saying, hey, this has got to change and we got to do this different.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I totally agree. We all have different skill sets, and there's not one way to do something. There's oftentimes multiple. And you need those voices and you need those perspectives, and I think that is important for folks to come together. I am and I'm still new to the coalition space, and I in my experience, I think that this coalition sort of set the model for what it may take to have similar wins around criminal justice reform. And so I think it's a model that we all should try to follow. Maybe not every single thing in the system that we want to change, but I think some of the big ones, this was a good model.
All right. And I want to add that we have, although I'm Christian, so when I talk about Jesus, the UCM is we encompass all faiths. So while I pray to my Jesus, we had others who, prayed to their God. And like I said, we came with all their power.
I felt really grateful to have a coalition that brought these different kind of complementary capacities. And I'll say at times, some of the community organizers would sit there in meetings where lawyers are going over fine points of legal policy, and it sort of made my head spin. But then I also really appreciated that we'd be in meetings with legislators where the lawyers really could get into the weeds and ultimately created a model for state legislation for this that was both rooted in the needs and experiences and visions of community leaders and folks impacted by incarceration, but also like translated into the language that we needed to get it across the finish line. And really that allowed the, the like power organizations and the folks like People's Lobby that brought some other capacities to like bring those to bear. And so when we'd knock doors in elections, or make demands of legislators, or do direct actions where we were shutting down the Cook County Central Court building, like we knew we had folks that had our backs with other kinds of skills that occupied other parts of the movement ecosystem. And I think it was ultimately, we didn't know at any given moment what capacities would be needed to move the ball forward. So the diversity of the coalition, which in hindsight looks like brilliant strategy, was at the time just like what we were doing to do the work together in whatever ways we thought made sense at any given moment. I also want to shout out some of our political allies like Senator Robert Peters, and the necessity of having strong both community organizing and electoral organizing to get real like movement champions. Like Senator Peters went from being a People's Lobby organizer at the coalition table to being a state senator who then helped us push the ball over the finish line. And I really salute and respect his leadership on this.
Absolutely. And, and think, with UCM and us using impacted people, this thing that the people that these laws were really, devastating to. We had our Expo group, hold a action outside of the St. Clair County Jail. And for those of you who don't know, Expo is ex-incarcerated people organizing. And, this was something that directly impacted them. And they were there passing out, the flyers with the 7 elements on it and bringing attention, to this and asking people, please call your legislatures, please make these phone calls. We had phone bankers, making calls. And I know People's Lobby had phone bankers making calls. So it took all of those efforts to move this thing forward.
Thank you all so much for that. And I just wanted to, I'm just kind of thinking about the timeline, the time that I've been on this campaign and all of the work that I saw and was privileged to be able to contribute to, and also just all of the time before that, right? This coalition formed in 2016, but the work was being done, in much longer before that. So thank you all for your dedication. Celebrate this win, celebrate this victory. I appreciate you, and I know the state of Illinois appreciates what we've been able to accomplish. So that's our panel.
Bye, guys.
Thank you all.
Oh, let me toss it to you, Sharon. That was a bad transition. So Sharon Mitchell Jr. of the Illinois Justice Project will give us a little bit of information about what actually just passed. What is in the bill. And thank you to Sharon for all of the work that you've done. You've been, I don't want to say tireless because you get tired, but you work. So thank you.
Hey y'all, my name is Sharon Mitchell Jr. I am with the Illinois Justice Project, and Illinois Justice Project, I'm proud to say, is a member of the Coalition to End Money Bond and the Network for Pretrial Justice. And I've been asked, and I'm happy to accept the task of being with you for the next 10 minutes and walking you through what is in the Pretrial Fairness Act. The bill does so much. Everybody knows that it ends cash bond, but it also remaps the entire decision-making process when it comes to making a decision about who's going to be in jail and who's out. It creates a statewide data collection system, and it alters a number of structures that, if they've gone awry, will force people into incarceration for inappropriate reasons. So we're going to get into the details. We're going to address some myths that are floating around the bill, and we're going to identify some places that we need to defend in the next few years if we want to protect our win. But before we do that, I want to take you back to just about 4 or 5 years ago. We were a big, diverse coalition looking to create big, comprehensive change to the system, which creates wealth-based incarceration. And if we were going to do this, if we were going to create the best piece of legislation and support it and get it passed, and not hate each other because we're this big diverse coalition, we needed to create principles that guided our work and guided the product that we put out. So one of our team members, as we were thinking about this panel and this program, thought, how about we describe the Pretrial Fairness Act through those principles that we created so long ago, and which have led us throughout this process the entire time. So hence the title, A Principled Walk Through the Pretrial Fairness Act. There are 6 principles. Let's look at principle number 1. Look, there's Malik. I know that guy. Principle number 1, money is never a determining factor in whether someone is free pending trial. So what does the bill do? It ends the use of cash bond, full stop. We know for decades, Illinois courts have set money bonds that are too high for many of the working class people and their families to pay. This has resulted in 2 systems, a system for the rich and a system for the poor. I saw that as a public defender. I knew that if people were forced in jail before their trial, they were more likely to plead guilty and more likely to serve a longer sentence. I also saw, and Patrice talked about a little bit, about poor folks who got the money up to make a bond. They put all their money together, but it forced them to create these terrible decisions: pay bond or pay rent, pay bond or pay my utilities. And that's why I'm so proud that the bill ends money bond. Now, we've heard in the media that California and New York proved that any money bond is a bad idea, but we know our bill is very different. And we know the California and New York approaches are very different. We know in California, they passed a law that the advocates, people like you and me, actually opposed. And that's the reason why the bill was repealed. And we know in New York, the bill was only on the books about 3 months before it was repealed, not because there were bad outcomes, because there was data suggesting it was a bad idea, but because there was a media that tore down and wrote these inflammatory stories that had folks act quickly. We know that we've got a great coalition here in Illinois. We know we've got buy-in from lots of stakeholders that we've educated on why this is a great thing, and we know it will be different. But any money bond just isn't enough. If we end that practice, it would be good, but it would be bad. It'd be worse if those folks were simply just stuck in jail without a way to get out. So that leads us to principle number 2. Release is the norm, and detention is the carefully limited exception. So again, we don't want to just end money bond, and those people that might not be able to bond out are just stuck in jail with no way to get out. We wanted to both end money bond and reduce pretrial incarceration. And we did it through what's called a detention net. That is, when a person goes before a judge, they'll go to a hearing. At that hearing, the judge will decide what conditions, if any, need to be put in place. At that point, a prosecutor can say, hey, we want to detain that person. However, for that person to be detained pre-trial, remember there's no evidence put against them, they have to be charged with a qualifying offense. Now, what are the qualifying offenses? This means that you have to be charged with a certain offense to even be eligible for pretrial detention. And those offenses are the non-probationable forcible felonies, the things like murder and very serious offenses, domestic violence and sexual assault cases involving a gun, and a handful of other very serious cases. But we know that the vast majority of people who are in the system are charged with other offenses outside of that group. So in Cook County, for example, about 80% of cases are ineligible for pretrial detention at that first hearing. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you're charged with a serious offense that you'll be held. We're just saying that is detention eligible. And the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorney have to go through a number of steps to prove that a person is eligible for detention. The process is set up so we're not increasing our pretrial incarceration. So what we've heard in the internet, some people talking about, well, any money bond is good, but more people will end up incarcerated. It's important to note that we've created a system that would actually reduce pretrial incarceration, and we've seen it work in states like New Jersey, who essentially ended their pretrial, essentially ended money bond, but we're also able to lower the amount of pretrial incarceration. Now, let's talk about principle number 3. Oh, actually, let me stay on principle number 2. I missed something. I'm sorry. Not yet, Karina. We also know that incarceration just doesn't mean behind bars. It also we should also be talking about e-incarceration. We also should be talking about electronic monitoring. And one of the things we've heard, if we pass this bill, that'll just force people on electronic monitoring. So we've really tried to put in regulations around electronic monitoring. Judges have to make special findings to put somebody on electronic monitoring, and those findings are appealable. We believe that will reduce the amount of people who might just well be forced into electronic monitoring. We know that judges are forced to reconsider those decisions every 60 days, right? So the defense attorney will have opportunities to argue against it. And if somebody's on electronic monitoring, we know that they are giving credit for their time, and we're ensuring that those folks will have movement while they're on electronic monitoring. We've heard too many stories of people stuck on electronic monitoring and they can't take their kids to school, or they can't get groceries to go feed themselves. We're making those changes in the Pretrial Fairness Act. Now, let's go on to principle number 3. Accused people are viewed holistically, and risk assessments are not used as substitutes for individualized decision-making. Now, we know too often in the current system, judges make bond decisions very quickly. We know that too often these decisions are made simply on allegations or on the person's background. And we know that too often the decisions can be justified based upon a confusing statute that has multiple contradictions and allows for somebody to be detained for any little reason. So that's the reason why we wanted to make sure that the Pretrial Fairness Act allowed for detention decisions to be reconsidered at any and every court date. And we also know that too often system players assume that risk assessments are the solution to this. And if we just use risk assessments, then that'll solve all of our problems. There can be back and forth on risk assessments. We knew that we couldn't ban risk assessments and get this bill passed. But we also knew it was important to look at how they're used. So we did things, we put in real strong reforms, like risk assessments can't be used as the sole factor for the decision-making processes. We saw that in California, and that was one of the reasons why advocates were against that bill. We also made it more transparent. We tried to open up that black box. If scoring systems of risk assessments have to be disclosed, and we know that we're giving them the right in the Pretrial Fairness Act, Defense Counsel, to challenge the validity of risk assessments, because we know too often, system stakeholders can just come up with any old risk assessment, and that risk assessment can justify incarceration, and we think we're doing it in an objective way when we're really not. So we're really excited about those additional reforms in the Pretrial Fairness Act. Let's talk about number 4. Principle number 4. Court hearings should help accused people attend court hearings and should restrain people's freedom as little as possible while they are legally innocent and awaiting their trial. So one of the things we know, and one of the things we tried to build in the Pretrial Fairness Act, that it wasn't just all about the decision-making process that a judge makes at the onset of the case. That there are things that happen before trial, before that hearing, and the things that happen after that hearing that can draw people into incarceration inappropriately. So we tried to look at that in 2 ways. Before trial, we tried to look at expanding law enforcement's ability to release people pre-trial, right? So we don't want to put it on law enforcement that they have the authority to release anybody, because we know there may be racial bias or they may do it wrong. But what we did is we said that there's a certain segment of cases, Class B and Class C misdemeanors, where they are essentially mandated, with a few exceptions, to release that person. These are people who don't need to be in the system, that in many jurisdictions already get out. So we want to make sure that's clear throughout the entire process. Now, that doesn't mean that the justice system is over for them. They still need to return to court. They still could be go through and quote unquote be held accountable for if they're found guilty. But we know that keeping those folks in jail does nothing for our public safety. It actually increases the likelihood that people are going to recidivate or break the law, quote unquote, again, or create harm. We also know that afterwards, that sometimes people can be late for court, right? Or they cannot get to court a day, and a judge is forced, his or her hands are tied. They must issue a warrant. And when that warrant is issued, they may be dragged into court forcibly and not released for the entire process. So we want to give the judges the flexibility by taking the mandate that you have to issue a warrant and give it the judge the flexibility to maybe decide, hey, this person has come to court 12 or 13 times. I've heard from the lawyers heard from them. They're going to come to court. They're a little late, or they may have forgotten. So we give these people a grace period to get back to court so that we're not sticking people in jail again for silly reasons. All right, let's talk about principle number 5. Court should only use restrictive pretrial conditions to ensure court appearances for people who have proven to be willfully avoiding prosecution. This is such an important piece of the puzzle. The PFA, Pretrial Fairness Act, creates clear standards for initial detention. Before, the system would allow people to be held just because they were assumed to be a danger to the community based on how they look. Sometimes people were held because there was some evidence they had missed court before. We are creating clear standards in the PFA that does not allow those snap judgments that happen in 1-minute hearings to take place. We're creating clear standards that have been proven to stop inappropriate incarceration. We're also reforming the process for determining violations of pretrial release, because somebody could be released and then there's a technical violation and they're forced back in incarceration. We wanted to create a real hearing process to allow for both sides to argue whether it's appropriate to take somebody's release and stick them in jail. That's something that did not exist in the law, and people were just dragged back into jail for really silly violations that had nothing to do with public safety. So let's talk about principle number 6. Pretrial practices should be transparent and accountable. So the Pretrial Fairness Act creates a statewide data collection process. This is so important. Typically, we hear from folks from across the state. We have a very long state with 102 counties, and you'll hear a local sheriff or a local police chief say, oh, well, pretrial incarceration or poor people being stuck in jail is not my problem. That's a Chicago problem. And then the good folks from the coalition have to do the hard work of looking at their jail and saying, wait, you got 50 people in your jail who, if they had $200, they'd get out. Or you got 25 people in your jail that are there on minor theft charges. The problem is that we kind of have to do that, county by county by county. And we've had these great court watching programs over our coalition's history, but we really need to do this more expansively. So we're having the state create a statewide data collection plan for counting what happens at bond court. And we know that data collection itself won't make the system right, but we do know that it will empower people like us to call people to the mat when they're doing things that are not right, and when they're getting on TV or getting on the radio and saying things that are not true. We're giving coalition members, network members, and advocates the ability to actually prove that folks just aren't telling the truth. So I'm so excited that we got this done. This bill is more than just any money bond. It's doing it in a really safe and fair way. I'm so excited that we have the support of so many domestic violence advocacy groups who support the bill because they know that the current system has not kept us safe. And those advocacy groups, along with over 100 groups, have supported ending the practice of money bond the way we do it through the PFA. All right, I'm gonna get a glass of water, and I am going to kick us off and move us forward. I'm so excited. We are going to hear from Brianna, who's going to lead us into our next panel. Brianna, are you there? Wow, this is magic. Here you are. What's up?
Yes, Black girl magic at its finest. I am here. Hi, everybody. My name is Brianna Payton. I am the policy analyst at the Chicago Community Bond Fund. We are so proud to be a part of the coalition to end money bond and the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice, and to be a part of the movement of so many people, so many endorsers, so much community power that brought this win to pass. Sharon just told us why we have so much to be excited about, all the things that are accomplished in this legislation. And yet this fight is not over. We still have work to do. We still have to protect this win. We have to see it through to implementation. And so the next panelists who are coming on are going to talk with us from their perspectives about how we can do that. So they are all appearing like magic, like Sharon said, on the screen. And I'm just going to invite them to introduce themselves before we get into this conversation about why we need to protect this win and how we're going to do that. So panelists, we can start with Senator Peters, and then you can just popcorn it.
Yeah, let me first just say I'm very honored and proud and humbled to come out of the coalition. And I know I've worked on this in Springfield, but I'm shocked every day that we're here, and it's really because we've built such a beautiful coalition with so many beautiful leaders. And I think that the reason I can't express how much this is important, I think in the last 40 years has been about failed tough on crime policies that haven't kept us safe. We're doing, we're at the front lines of what it means to actually have safety in our communities. And what we were able to get done and the work that we have left is truly transformational. And we're not going to let, the opponents just bring us down. So I'm honored to be here, and I'm excited to dig in more. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Lavette, do you want to go next?
Yes. Hi, my name is Lavette Mays. I'm with the Coalition to End Money Bond. I am an advocate for the Chicago Community Bond Fund, and I'm so happy to see you, Senator Peters. I'm excited at what you all done. I was shocked as you. I still feel like I'm on a dream. I think when we found out this was going to pass, we were up all night long, literally back and forth, texting each other. And I'm just so excited that Illinois has taken the lead in the nation to end money bond. And I think this is just great that we have taken the lead to end this.
Thank you so much, Lavette. You've been in this fight for a long time, and it's been a long time coming. So we're excited too. It is surreal. Thank you for being with us. Nick, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nick M. Malinowski. I'm the Civil Rights Campaign Director at Vocal New York. I use he, him pronouns. I'm really enjoying this panel so far, just in learning more about what you all did in Illinois, and happy to be part of the discussion and hopefully sharing, something that's helpful from New York.
Thank you. We're so excited to have you. And last but not least, Reverend Patterson.
Hello, everyone. I'm thankful to be a part of the Pretrial Justice group, because a few years ago, I had an opportunity to work with a group that ended execution in the state of Illinois. I don't know if you all remember a time when they executed so many people that were innocent. And I was part of that campaign as well. And sometimes you get naysayers and all that kind of stuff, but they fade away over time. So we don't have to be afraid. If God brought us this far, then he can take us on even a little further. But I'm happy to be a part of this. And I'm from Southern Illinois, the all-American city of East St. Louis.
Awesome. Thank you so much, bringing that downstate power. So we are just going to jump into the conversation. And I think it's so important to really center the experiences of people who are who have lived the devastation and the impact of pretrial incarceration, because that is why we do this. And so, Lavette, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you because you were incarcerated in Cook County Jail for a year and a half because you couldn't afford your bond. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to tell us a little bit about how that experience impacted you and your family, and why the Pretrial Fairness Act and the changes it will bring is so important.
In 2015, well, I lived in Chicago all my life. I'm on the east side, so I stayed over here like all my life. Not knowing how the system actually worked, I was arrested and incarcerated in 2015. I was in jail for 571 days. I was incarcerated for 426 days in the jail, and then I spent another 145 days on electronic monitoring and 1 day in Logan Correction Center. It impacted my family tremendous because I could not afford to pay my bond. My bond was placed at $250,000, $25,000 to walk. During the process, I never knew any other time. I just went to county strictly for jury duty. I had never had a background, a record, or anything. And to spend that enormous amount of time in jail, and because you couldn't afford to pay your bond, I was just totally, outraged. I was hurt. I missed a lot out of my family. I wasn't able to go to my kids' graduation. I lost my business. I lost housing. I end up being on electronic monitoring where I had to stay with family members. And I don't know if people know, when you're staying with family members, it's just like they're being incarcerated too, because they have to take a lot for you to come there and stay for 145 days. So this hurt and tore bonds between me and family members. And as of today, I'm still suffering, and still have a lot of things that I have to go through, trauma with my kids and counseling and everything. It never stops. And by me not being away from my kids for that kind of length of time, it tremendously traumatized them. And as today, they're still going through, traumatization regarding this. And I'm just so excited that we were able to really, when I got out of jail, it was no doubt as to what I was going to do. I think I told every correction officer that passed that said, I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else, because I couldn't believe that this was happening in the United States. I think a lot of people don't understand what happens behind jail. They're not able to articulate it, or they're afraid to speak out. And I knew that I was afraid not to speak out. So this helped me tremendously, to have help get this passed. Um, so other people, black and brown, and other people don't have to go through this. And this really helped me. I think I've been so excited, and just me and my kids, going back and forth to court. I remember how hard it was. Every time I left, my kids was crying. And they just never could get it together. I remember that going back and forth, and just back and forth, even when I was on electronic monitoring, them just not having dates, that my court hearing was supposed to be this day, and just a sheriff telling you, well, if you leave the house, then we'll get you then. And I have a court date this day, and it's not documented to the sheriffs. I remember all of that, and it just, constantly traumatized my kids. I remember just telling them, look, I talked to my attorney. I told him that my kids couldn't go through this anymore. My family was suffering. The people I was staying with was suffering. I told them that, listen, we're going to sit down. I'm going to talk about this. I remember sitting my kids, my sister, and other family members down, and I told them that I'm considering taking a plea. I talked to my attorney. He told me it would be another year and a half on electronic monitoring for my case to come to trial. And I could not no longer put them through that. Every time I went to court, it was crying. Everybody was on pins and needles, and you're going back and forth. And when I told them, you know, I'm like, Chicago doesn't win cases. A lot of people are just clean out of these cases because you're going back and forth. And what is the toll that it is harming and taking your family? You can't work. You can't provide. You can't. I missed my son's first day of school because I didn't have movement. And it just really traumatized your family, and it takes a lot. And just the time that it has to undo this is taking that much time to try to just get to normalcy for you and your kids. So, you know, I was like, when this passed, I think I cried for a few minutes. And the kids was like, why are you crying? I was like, because we finally obtained that no one has to go through what we did. And then they understood that because it was so hard for us, for housing, you know, just to do regular things. And today, I can still, you still continue to be punished for something that you pay, you know, your debt to society.
Right.
And I'm just happy that the ending of money bond is just one step as to what we have obtained through this. And has been great. I really, really appreciate the senators for passing this through because it was really hard. It's really hard on families. And the amount of time that you're spending, this can be put back into your community. When you're being stripped, you're stripping it for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Livette. Your story is so unique and so heart-wrenching. And then at the same time, there are so many people, 250,000 people every year that are impacted by this very thing, by this very monster that pulls people into the criminal legal system and forces, like you talked about, being forced, basically, forced to take a plea, forced because the system is twisting your arm and holding your pretrial freedom over your head when it's supposed to be your right. And so you're right. It's like you said, it's surreal. It's amazing that people won't have to deal with that in the same way that you did, because nobody should have to go through that. So thank you so much for lifting that up. Does anyone else, before we move on to the next questions, does anyone else just want to talk about what this win means, the transformative impact of the passage of this legislation?
I mean, Livette, just thank you for sharing the story. I think, to me, the transformation is the fact that this is the one place where you can say it's the intersection of race, class, and gender. It literally is at that intersection when we think about money bond. And, you know, recently in the news, we've been hearing stories about Kyle Rittenhouse, who, because of his privilege and because he was connected to so many donors, was able to get out on bond. And I think it talks about how we have a tiered system of safety, of who is allowed to be free, who is allowed to have liberty. You know, it's a system that is, excuse my language, I'm not supposed to curse, but it's fucked up, to be very honest with you. Please forgive me. But that, you know, if you are poor, it's one tier. If you're poor and Black, it's another tier. If you're poor, Black, and a woman, it's an even lower tier. And then you have a bunch of people who tell you that this is about looking out for you, while at the same time, it destroys and cripples your life on so many levels. It takes wealth out of the community. It takes wealth out of the individual. So I think this is historic, and I think we're going to talk about this later, but there are a lot of people who keep speaking on behalf of what we need in our communities and telling us what it means to have safety, who've technically failed. They've failed for 40 plus years. They've failed over and over again. They're tied to the same BS old talking points, and they're selling us snake oil. It's fake. And, I'm getting a little upset, but yeah, I think this is just a historic win that we're going to have to continue to fight on and keep pushing back on. and to have the realization that every community in the state of Illinois, and let me just say to Vocal New York, I love Vocal New York. I know the grassroots work that you all do. Everyone in this country deserves to have real safety and justice, and that's not going to be just rounding up people and locking them in cages or sticking them on EM or overly relying on algorithms and surveillance tech. What it really means is that you have a good school, you have a good job, you have a roof over your head, you have a neighborhood that you feel comfortable walking down, that you are invested in, not just as a person, but as a community and as a society. So, I think this is, I always say, everybody's like, oh, well, now you're done. This is not the end of something. This is the beginning of something. And now I'm done preaching.
Take us to church. We don't mind. I know the Reverend will agree. But you shouted out the work that Nick did with Vocal New York. So Nick, you're here from New York. We really appreciate you coming because y'all also passed bail reform, but you also dealt with pushback, heavy pushback against the reforms that you passed, to the point where some of the progress was rolled back. And so we have a lot to celebrate, but we also have a lot to fight for to protect this win. And so we wanted to bring you on and really ask you, kind of from your perspective of what happened in New York, where did the main attacks come from? What were their strategies? What were their critiques? And what was the role of fear mongering also in the rollbacks that took place? The fear versus the facts of what the real impact of bail reform was.
Thanks, Brianna. Just like as a tiny bit of background, we passed our bill after years and years in 2019, in the spring of 2019. It was a limited bail reform that basically prohibited money bail, jail, remand, anything for most charges, with the exception of violent felonies. Violent felonies could be in the money bail pot. Still, that's an oversimplification, but basically what it did. But the implementation date was put away for a year. So it was actually January 2020 when implementation was formally supposed to happen. So we did win a lot of gains in 2019 as courts, counties started preparing to follow the law going into 2020. And in some ways it was like false gains, like the gains were good, but it did not prepare us for sort of what was going to happen 2020 as soon as January turned and the law was implemented formally. The other piece of background is that 2020 was an election year. And so, we dealt with over 2019 going to 2020, the sort of typical complaints from prosecutors and cops. And, it wasn't an avalanche. It was just kind of here and there, people complaining, it's too hard, we can't do it, we needed more time. And then 2020 with the election year, it became like the biggest story in the news. And I think, we were prepared for the police and the prosecutors to make their arguments that this was going to take safety away, that this was going to be mayhem, this kind of thing. But it also got into kind of like the general political, story of the year. And also in 2020, we're dealing now with redistricting. So it really became the main tool that Republicans used to try and win back the political power that they have lost over the last decade. And so the idea with redistricting is basically now with Democrats in control, the Republicans are not going to be back in the legislative power for another 10 years. And so this was kind of like their last stand. So we were dealing with, in some ways, like a dog in the corner situation where they were pulling out all stops and bail reform became the main talking point. And so we were dealing with media cycles, sometimes that had nothing to do with bail reform, for cases that people were always entitled to release, right? Like in New York, almost every case throughout history has been entitled to release, but that bail has been set in amounts that people can't afford, like in Illinois. And so all of a sudden we were hearing stories where something would happen and bail reform was the fault of it in the media, even though it was not true. And so we were put on the defensive just really by the sheer volume of the media attacks that were coming in and the media literacy being very low. So a lot of the reporters who were covering the issue don't actually know about safety, don't actually
Angie,
live in communities that are impacted.
hit the door for me.
And so that was part of it, was just literally debunking the facts that the police and prosecutors were putting out. This story has nothing to do with bail reform. This story has nothing to do with anything that you're talking about. And while we were able to do that for some of the bigger papers, our real challenge was the local news. So it was like, it was 24/7 on every small local TV channel for the whole year. And so while we were able to get at the bigger media and get corrections and things like that, we really were not able to deal with Channel 10 going down to the police station at 11 o'clock at night and saying, what's going on? And then the cops saying bail reform is bad. And then that playing 3 times in the next day before anyone would even get a chance to see it. And so I think that was a big piece of it. And then the other piece that we really didn't prepare for was also all of this stuff flowing into the kind of Trump era, also media narratives and xenophobia and racism and these like big media channels on Facebook and internet, using all of that stuff, where this again got into that sort of stream and got escalated in a way that was very hard for us to manage.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And we're gonna circle back to what advice you might have around strategies to respond to that a little bit later on. But what you're highlighting is just so salient, which is that people, and Senator Peters says this a lot, people oftentimes when it comes to especially criminal justice reform like to choose fear over facts. They like to say, I'm afraid that this is going to make things more safe. And it's almost like they manifest their fears and they have confirmation bias to say bail reform is causing us to be less safe because they already think that it will, even if what happened has nothing to do with bail reform. And so the people watching, that's a note of caution to, as you're taking in news and things about the bill and what's happening, really fact check, really dig into the data and understand. The research has shown us that bail reform does not drive up non-appearance. It doesn't drive up crime. And so we don't want to allow ourselves to be swayed by media that has an agenda, especially when it's driven by people who just don't want to see this progress take place. And actually, Senator Peters, to the point about kind of these accusations that it causes crime and it makes us less safe and it's not good for victims. As one of the champions of this legislation that has poured through it and been a part of this movement for so long, can you speak to those accusations? Can you speak to people who are really wondering, will this let them know how bail reform can actually make our community safer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that I'll go to is that a lot of actors within law enforcement and a lot of reactionary folks love to just pick on bail. They love to hit at bail. It's almost like a crutch. It's mainly because if you think about it, they might not be doing their job well in other parts in terms of incarceration. So they have to say the bail system's the one that's failing. A good example of this is look at the clearance rates that we see right now in terms of crime. Well, we're not putting a judgment on them on that's their supposed job, but they're going to blame something that has nothing to do with that, like bail. But to go to, in terms of safety, I sort of did this when I got into my rant, when I got on my little high horse there, which is we know what a safe community is. Like, we know what that looks like, what that feels like, whether we live in it, whether we visited it, whether we've seen it on TV, right? A safe community has a lot of good investment in it, both on an individual level and a community level, and as well as on a systemic level, right? We know that safety is when you go to school, you feel comfortable drinking the water in your school, just like you feel comfortable that you can drink water with a place that has a roof over your head and you have food on your table. Right? We know that safety is that you're getting paid a living wage and you have power in your workplace. When we think of a safe community, we know that is a community that has a high level of investment. What we know is not safety is overly relying on blue lights and roaming the street. It's not closed circuit television watching every corner. That is not actually what a safe community is. And when I think about ending money bond, I think about that breaking down those tiers of safety and saying that the conversation we need to have is what every community has. The conversation we need to have about safety is making sure that people have the things that they need. Now the bill that we have does have some things in there. So if someone is a threat to a person or the community, it sort of means that they're more likely to be detained, right? If they show that, if they're a real threat there. For example, if you're a survivor of domestic violence, that is something that we worked on with domestic violence and sexual assault organizations to make sure that happens. But even though we spent all this time working on it, I want to point out that opponents continue to speak on behalf of domestic violence survivors and sexual assault survivors, even though we've done all this work to work with advocates on the ground. And so I think the main part here is removing the idea of the tiers in terms of the economic justice issue, in terms of racial justice and gender justice, and saying, let's refocus our justice system around something that's really material in people's lives. And I think that's just, they're going to go after it pretty hard, and I'm a little defensive, but I think that's really the fight, not only that's led us here, but the fight we're going to continue to be on, especially because 2020 was sort of a period of three crises, right? It was a crisis in public health, it was a crisis economically, and it was a crisis when it comes to racism, particularly in law enforcement. And when we think about bond and we think about pretrial detention, it hits at that crisis very hard, right? Those crises. If you're locked up in Cook County Jail, which is a congregate setting, you are at greater risk for getting COVID, right? You're in there most likely because you are too poor to be able to get out. And you're most likely there because we have a system of mass incarceration that is racist. So it is the fact that in 2020, we saw all these crises. And as we move forward, our job is to make sure that, the best way I put this is I look at my neighbor and I say, how can I help? They look at me and they say, how can I help? And that we actually help each other as we move forward from 2021 on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Peters. Reimagining what safety is, and not forsaking justice so that people can feel comfortable, is what you're hitting at. And that's so important. Reverend Patterson, I would love to hear from you, especially, like I said, bringing the downstate power. People like to think about criminal justice reform as kind of a city issue, a Cook County issue, but we know that that's not the case. And through your work with the Gamaliel Network, you've come in contact with communities across Illinois in this work. So can you tell us a little bit about why it's important that the changes of the Pretrial Fairness Act are statewide, and why that sense of safety that we were just talking about needs to be applied statewide, real safety and justice?
Well, unfortunately, the situation that the senator just described is like the coronavirus. It does not pick and choose who it's going to affect. It's just in the air, and we infect one another. From my perspective, it's totally different, because I get the people who come to church, and it's like a sanctuary for hurting. And the biggest problem in Southern Illinois that I've discovered in St. Clair and Madison County is that it was the young Black men that were incarcerated the most. Mm-hmm. And it was as if the police departments in the area were on a mission, that if they went to Fairview Heights, where the Walmart, or the O'Fallon, where the Walmart is, and many of them had to go there and cash their checks, or they had to go there and buy the baby some Pampers, or whatever the need was. They set out at certain times of the month. If they saw a young Black male driving a vehicle And if it was 2 or more in there, they pulled them over for no reason. And they immediately incarcerated them. The problem is most of them didn't have enough to pay bail, or they didn't have family members to come and bail them out of St. Clair County Jail or Madison County Jail. There are very few city jails in between. Fallon has one, but East St. Louis jail down, and they were sending everybody to St. Clair County. Well, what I got at church was a cry from mothers, a cry from young women who either were married to these men or were living with them, and they could no longer go to work, even if they had minimum wage jobs. They could no longer help with raising of the kids. And so it impacted the community. So you got a bunch of young people under the age of 15, say, in the community with very few men, the ages 18 through 30, to help model behavior to help the kids grow up. So you had these mothers raising these children by themselves. And the whole problem was they were incarcerating most of the young Black males. Now, I can't tell you about other cultures because that's where my church is, and that's where I was born and raised. Didn't live there always, but I served the people in that community. And this is the biggest problem. So in the spring, when I became, relational, because Gamaliel is a relational organization, we build power because we build relationships. And I became relational with the other pastors in the community. I discovered they were having the same problems. So what can we do? What is it that we can do to prevent this? You go to those people who are in charge and you talk to the sheriff in St. Clair County. And his thing is, well, if they do the crime, they do the time. We're not talking about that. We're talking about putting people in jail before they've actually been charged with a crime. These are people you just pick up because they are traveling to a community where there are resources, where they have to shop. And why are you targeting them? And I can give you an example of one mother whose son works for a university. And he came over and his car got a flat. He pulled on the side of the highway. Mistake. Young, Black, flat tire. That doesn't fly in St. Clair County. And because he didn't have a spare and he didn't have a lot of money, they just arrested him. They took him to Fairfield. His mother ended up spending $1,500 to get him out of jail. And then they made him jump through hoops. She spent about $3,000 to $4,000 and he still owes money. He still hasn't been cleared. But she's keeping him out of jail so that he can get his job.
Yeah.
And so it's a story that you hear across the country, across the state of Illinois, and I know they're targeting certain groups of people everywhere, but my concern is those young Black men.
Yeah, no,
what do
you're
we
right.
do? What do we do? I'm hearing when they get there, this particular legislation stops them from keeping them in jail because they don't have money.
Yeah.
But what do we do to stop them from continuing to harass young Black men just because of their skin color? Yeah. I don't have an answer for that. And honestly, it's a spiritual answer because it's not only racism. It's a lot of other isms, but it's
Yeah.
racism connected with, they're trying to, I said the women in church, they want husbands and they can't find none. And then you want to know why one woman has, or two or three women have one baby daddy.
No,
Because it's
Reverend.
not a many men going around. They put them in jail. It's a form of, I guess, I get off on a tangent.
No, it's real. Listen, it's real. It's a real issue. I know we're running short on time. And so I really appreciate what you highlighted about statewide people being harassed and oppressed by the criminal legal system. It's not a Cook County thing. And it is, and it often can be worse in some other parts of the states because of the politics and sometimes the way that it can be very very conservative and sometimes areas with a lot of racism, to just be blunt, and we have to be able to disempower the system from especially oppressing people in other parts of the state where there can be even higher levels of vulnerability. So thank you so much for lifting that up, because that is unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And so the last thing I want to just, we really have to wrap up, but I just want to ask Nick quickly, if you have any advice to us as we seek to win this fight, to not have the same thing happen with the rollbacks and the pushbacks and the power trips from the opposition. Is there any parting wisdom that you have for us?
I don't know if it's wisdom, but I think the important thing that we learned is that the law is just sort of the battlefield. It's just the landscape that you're operating in, and you're still dealing with discretion from police, like the Reverend said. You're still dealing with discretion with prosecutors, judges, and so there has to be just constant pressure from our side on the system in order to secure the win. So. In April of 2020, the New York City jail population was 3,800. Now it's at 5,500. So that is the law did not change in that time period. It was just, again, this, COVID related things in the court, but also all of the fear mongering and pressure from the opposition in terms of locking people up, the pandemic, everything that's going on. And so that was not based on a change of law. It was just based on a change of sort of political landscape and political decision-making that's going on from the actors in the court. So I think the critical need to put pressure on the system at all times. And then I think it is also about providing those other solutions and being really clear about that. There is the criminal legal system plays a specific role in a capitalist, racist society. And at some point, we are butting up against the way of life in the United States. And until we start linking this kind of fight with efforts to defund the police, with efforts to win resources in the communities, there's always going to be, like the Reverend said, an excuse that a policeman is going to have for stopping people, right? That's always going to exist no matter how we change the law until we actually start providing the more structural solutions that, we know are the things that would work.
Yeah. What you said that stuck out there is that we are butting up against a way of life. The fabric of this nation is wound up with incarceration, criminalization, and punishment. And, I read a line in a book by Alec Karagisanis, who's worked with our coalition on bail reform. And he actually quoted James Baldwin, who said that we live in a society that actually measures their safety in chains, that actually feels safer with bodies and corpses in chains and people suffering and people being bound, because that is how we measure safety. And so we have to do everything that we can to fight back against this narrative that our safety is found in chains. And so we have to keep up the pressure. Thank you all so much for lifting up this we Thank you for sharing your perspectives, Lavette, your lived experience, Senator Peters, Nick, your wisdom, Reverend Patterson, your wisdom. We are so grateful for your perspective. And I'm going to bring up Lavette to close out this event so that we can let everybody get to dinner and whatever else they have going on. But thank y'all so much for being here tonight. Adrian.
Good evening. Thank you everyone for sticking with us. We still have a good handful of people still with us at 7:30. So thank you for joining. Again, I mean, the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice is composed of over 30 organizations. More than 100 organizations support the Pretrial Fairness Act at the moment. So thank you. And it's worth mentioning, you know, we are in the 4th day of Black History Month, and in this moment we are making history. So of course, you know, we need to keep up momentum. There are a couple ways to stay engaged in the fight, because of course, you know, we are hoping that, we are needing the governor to sign the bill already. So there are a couple actions to take. I'm hoping that someone will drop them in the chat. If not, I will help drop those in the chat. But first, again, because of the organizing of impacted people, community members, advocates, elected officials, the Pretrial Fairness Act has passed, and we need to keep fighting. So on Thursday, February 11th, which is actually my birthday, and as well as Tuesday, February 16th, we'll be holding virtual events to stay engaged and protect the Pretrial Fairness Act. And we are also hoping that you will still be sending letters to your legislators as well as Pritzker. And yeah, Brianna, did you want to add to that?
No, that's it. We're going to get together a week from tonight to put pressure, not put pressure. We want to really thank and support legislators that pass this bill, because they're coming under crazy attack by law enforcement and opposition, and they're being pressured to do exactly what has happened in other states, which is roll this progress back. So we don't want to get too comfortable. We want to celebrate, but we want to continue to fight. And so that is what these events are about next Thursday and the following Tuesday, is raising our voices to say what just happened is a good thing. And we do not want you to roll it back. We do not want you to succumb to fear mongering. We do not want you to listen to law enforcement that don't want to see people have their freedom that is their right. So come out with us to take action in community, to raise our voices and protect the win that we just secured. And please, if you've already sent a letter to your legislator, we've added a letter to Pritzker because the bill is officially on his desk. So it is time for him to sign it and get this thing going and make it official. So go to the link that's being dropped in the chat to send a letter to your legislators and Pritzker if you haven't already. And please, please, please share it with your networks. Like Adrian said, we are making Black history. We are making history. We are undoing generations worth of damage and oppression that has ruined so many lives. And this is not the time to slow down. This is the time to speed up. This is the time to hammer down. And together we are going to keep this win. Okay?
Yeah. Call your aunties, call your friends, anybody in Illinois.
Everybody, your mama.
Tell them to join us.
Yes, please. So that is all we have for you. Thank you so much for coming out and celebrating with us tonight. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for educating yourself about this issue and this legislation. And enjoy your evenings, rest and bask in the win. But let's keep fighting. Thank y'all.
Woo!
Woo!